Welcome back to another episode of Bitfinex Talks. I'm your host, Ricardo Martinez. Today, I'm joined by Justin Orkney, who is with Standard Power, a Bitcoin mining company that's based in the United States. Justin, how are you doing today, man? Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me, Ricardo. Looking forward to the conversation.
Indeed, likewise. Justin, my first question, I guess, to kick off the interview is, why don't you tell us about your background and how you got into the mining industry?
I have a background in electric utilities, going back for over the decade, and I've been trying to think. I've actually been reflecting on it a bit recently, and I think an interesting way to sort of uh, uh, refer to my history is I think it's pretty fair to say that I'm the SEAL Team Six of mitigating the impacts of solar and wind on the grid, and I know that might sound kind of strange, but really as I go back and I look back on everything I've done within the electric utility space, it really has been um, focused intensely on everything to do with solar. I was in Arizona for 6 years with Tucson Electric Power, and I was in charge of interconnection applications. I was in charge of interconnection standards. Like it's all new. It's all happening, and um, rate design, like just everything. I was sort of kind of a man in the middle. I was involved in everything: regulatory attorneys, uh, meter men, solar installers, customers, um, just just everywhere. I was in the thick of it, and always something very interesting, very consequential going on with regards to the electric utility trying to figure out how best to go about dealing with solar, with essentially this onslaught of solar energy onto the system, in terms of regulatory, in terms of engineering on the system, in terms of customer relations, in terms of rate design, just everything. It's all happening at once. And I was, a lot of times behind the scenes, but I was basically like, that was just what I did. I was involved in everything, like all the time, and essentially I was basically the hired gun, for whatever it was. And then fast forward 6 years, I start getting involved with um, demand response programs, customer thermostat programs. EV chargers are starting to come online, so I'm still doing everything with solar. And now I'm starting to kind of lead the efforts in the utilities' interest in engaging with customers, and essentially trying to maybe control the end uses of electricity, as an engineering way to put it. And that it's become more and more critical to this day that utilities are able to get to control customers and users of electricity, because they're losing control of the generation. And it's always got to be a balance in real time between generation and customer demand. And solar and wind provide you no control over that, for obvious reasons. And so, but at the same time, we had the Internet of Things coming out. We started to have new opportunities to perhaps manage customers and users of electricity, and maybe start to try and use that as a grid resource, right? And so then, basically at that point, I was recruited to join one of the largest electric utilities in the country, certainly the most innovative. Again, I'm the hired gun, right? And they recruited me to join them. I was put on a very specific team within a larger team under our senior vice president that recruited me. And there were like 3 or 4 of us, and the whole umbrella organization underneath our senior vice president was already like very very dynamic within the larger organization. In general, it was the one in charge of new rate designs, new customer programs, uh, net metering reform, just everything, right? And always with an eye to system operations and reliability, right? Like that was what we were solving for, was how do we, at the end of the day, maintain reliability on the system from an engineering perspective, with the onslaught of intermittent unreliable solar generation. How do we change customer rate designs and reform net metering so that the subsidies aren't so large, right? How do we start designing new, like I mentioned, thermostat programs, new EV charging programs? So my team of 3 or 4, we were in all of it. Like we were the front lines, and this utility had, it spanned 6 different states: Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. And each one of those states had its own unique issues. I mean, a lot's the same, but a lot's very different too. Indiana has lots of wind. Florida, North Carolina have lots of solar. Um, the different policies with respect to customer rates and customer, net metering, and like just everything was a little different, and we were all trying to reform each one of them. And the team I was on was basically like, we were on the front lines of all of that. And then, just the last thing to say is, like EV charging programs, we were just right there coming up with new business models, new rate designs, new demand response programs for charging people, or for people charging their vehicles. Just across the board, like that was my life. And then I found Bitcoin mining in my day job, more or less, right? I was in charge of, or like my charge was to try and imagine how we're going to maintain reliability on the system as more and more solar is coming online, and wind. Um, and and then I recognized Bitcoin mining back in early 2020, and it was an incredible aha moment. I recognize it as an engineering technology, like as a great resource, because it's so flexible. It can be turned on, turned off right away. It's scalable. It can be really small Bitcoin mine. It can be really a large Bitcoin mine, but even the large Bitcoin mines don't take up a lot of space. So like, uh, you start to have all this opportunity to think of Bitcoin mining um, as a great resource, and even if there's a customer involved, a partnership with the customer, and you can really start to address all the issues that we were trying to solve for with thermostats, pool pumps, water heaters, car chargers, all that stuff, we, which is very complicated. It's Anyway, it's not going anywhere. I don't think it doesn't scale, right? But Bitcoin mining, boom, easy, done, right? And so that's how I got into Bitcoin mining. I started doing my best within I started up a pilot project. I started doing research. I started educating internally. This is kind of how you build out new concepts. Certainly something as new to grid engineers, and then Bitcoin, right? Like I can sit there, I can use engineering words, I can mask what I'm talking about. I can be talking to engineers. Okay, here's the problem. All right, what if we had like a flexible point load that could be, what do you need, 10 megawatts? Okay, what if we had a flexible 10 megawatt point load that you could turn on and off at any time? Does that solve your problem? Yeah. Okay, cool. So Bitcoin mining. Whoa, Bitcoin? Like, what about Russia? What about money laundering? But it's like, oh my gosh. Okay, guys, what if it disappears tomorrow, right? So, um, anyway, that's an ongoing effort. I still consult with that utility, and the project's actually moving forward. It's very exciting. But I joined Standard Power a year ago, a little over a year ago now, and we're building out really large energy infrastructure for, we host miners. So we build out the infrastructure, we develop the site, and then, commercial mining operations that are looking for a place to plug in and like what we have to offer, they're our clients, and they put in their 10 megawatts, 4 megawatts, 30 megawatts, whatever it is. And, we're fully integrated into the grid. We do demand response. It's really exciting what we're doing. And we're building it out slowly but surely. It has the opportunity. We basically have like over 1 gigawatt of capacity in Eastern Ohio at this particular site. It's certainly not there yet. We're getting close to 100, but that's the plan, to build out this site for Bitcoin miners and other data centers. And again, they're strategically integrated into the grid. It provides our clients a benefit because they provide value back to the system by being dynamic and willing to shut off, in the highest demand hours of the year or what have you. They get compensated for that in the form of, just overall a lower rate in general. So that's my role at Standard Power, and that's what I'm doing now. And yeah.
Well, thank you for that very detailed introduction to what it is that you do. I guess for laymen that don't really understand the energy industry like you do, how exactly are Bitcoin miners like helping solve these problems in the energy industry? Can you kind of just give us like a layman's description of what the issue is with demand and how Bitcoin miners kind of relieve that issue that you're having?
Yeah. I think in general, you start with the underlying premise that at every instant in time, the amount of generation, the amount of electricity being put into the system essentially has to equal the amount of energy that all the customers are using on that system, and they have to stay balanced. And if they don't stay balanced, then your voltage starts to drop, your frequency starts to lag, or vice versa, right? So that's just a foundational underlying necessity, and then everything sort of emanates from there. And basically what Bitcoin mining allows you to do is a utility now can basically have reliable certainty, for the most part, that if the generation from solar, let's say, right, just an obvious example, let's say a cloud goes over, right, and the solar, so like everything was balanced between the generation and the demand, but then a cloud comes over and now the generation drops down. Okay, well, you got to balance them out. So you either you either try to turn on a power plant like a nat gas generator to ramp it up, or you can turn off customer load. And it's very difficult to turn off customer load, understandably so, because people don't want their electricity.
People get upset.
Right, but Bitcoin miners, this is the magic part. Bitcoin miners, they don't care, right? Like obviously they want to be mining Bitcoin for the most part, but if it's part of a relationship, a win-win scenario where, because they're providing the utility the opportunity to shut them down at a moment's notice, like instantaneously and reliably for as long as needed, they provide that service to the utility, and then the utility compensates them for it, because they don't now they don't have to fire up that new power plant, right? Like they were just able to do this, and it's very simple. It's very unique. No other customer is like that. That was my job. My detailed overview. My job was like, how are we going to figure out how to manage customer load, right? That was one of my main roles. And here it is. Bitcoin mining. It's so unique as a customer. and there's so much opportunity for that flexibility from a customer. It's just going to be so powerful on the system and so valuable.
Thank you for describing how Bitcoin mining kind of fits into the puzzle piece there. You're kind of well known for being on Twitter amongst Bitcoiners and calling things that other people praise, renewable energy like wind and solar, shitcoins. And to me, that's absolutely hilarious. But why is it that you think that wind and solar are shitcoins when everybody else thinks that they're like, you know, a clean source of renewable energy and sing nothing but praises about them?
Yeah, right. Well, I guess I'd like to just state that not everybody says that, but you're certainly right. That is the conventional wisdom. You know, solar is great, wind is great. What we've done is good, and more is better, right? Sooner, faster. Like it's and it just couldn't be further from the truth. Again, like I said, I'm the hired gun, right? I've been in the trenches for the last 10 years, dealing specifically with how utilities are going to address the challenges of this solar and wind coming on the system. That's been my whole career. Even now with Bitcoin mining, right? Like the value that Bitcoin mining provides to the grid, well, the utilities need it. They need it desperately. And they need it because they have so much solar on the system that they have, you know, it's unreliable and it's intermittent. Like best case scenario, the sun's going to set, right? Like with the case of solar. So I think just in general, if you just look at what they are, right? Take the emotion out of it. Just look at it as a piece of technology. What is it doing? Solar, it's just producing arbitrary, intermittent, unreliable generation based on its orientation relative to that of the sun. That's it. You know, a cloud gets in the way, boom, it's gone. Like, and then of course, like I said, best case scenario, the sun's always going to set. And so it's just this incredibly, I think, harmful generation source on the system. And you know, but you're right. It promises so much more, right? Like everybody loves it. Everybody thinks it's incredible. But meanwhile, our grids, after 2 decades of installing solar, are more unreliable, more complex, right? That's why I was getting recruited to do what I do, right? Things are getting more and more complicated, more unreliable, capacity constrained, right? You hear executives at every utility all over the country. We're capacity constrained. That means that they don't have any more reliable capacity on the system for any new customers. All right. But these are states that are they're top states in solar installation, top states in wind installation. And yet they are more unreliable, more complex, more constrained than ever. And they're getting more expensive than ever, right? Like all like I was being paid to try and solve these problems, and I was not the only person. They're devoting so much. So anyway, the point is, yeah, they don't deliver on their promise. They are taking think of California, think of Texas, right? What do you think of California when you think of electricity, right? They're the most unreliable. Yeah, they're the most unreliable grid in the country. They're the number 2 solar capacity in the country, and they're probably like top 5 in wind, right? And now they're number 1 in batteries. And they're the most expensive, most unreliable, and it's only going to get worse, and most capacity constrained. And it's not like that's it, right? I mean, and there's a lot more to say about the nitty gritty of like why exactly solar and wind don't deliver and are actually really harmful to the grid. But in general, just take a look around, right? Like it's not, you can
That's
sort of just decipher, right?
Yeah. That's very fascinating. That you, as someone that's like worked in the industry and has had like firsthand experience, is saying all this when the stuff we hear in the media is like the exact opposite. So like it's been a few decades that they've done this push for renewable energy. How did things function before they started installing all these windmills and solar energy like production facilities? Like what did they use before solar and wind?
Yeah, Coal, natural gas, nuclear. There's a little bit of geothermal, hydro. Power plants.
Okay.
Power plants that, for the most part, you could you could at least like have certainty in what they were going to produce. You may not be able to adjust it like nuclear, right? It's not very flexible. It can be somewhat flexible, but very little, right? It just wants to hum at the same level, but you know what it's going to be 24/7, 365. Natural gas power plant, you can flex it up, flex it down. It's better if it just runs at the same rate, but you have flexibility there. Coal power plants, right? So it was all that, and then customers did their thing, and the utilities maintained the reliability on the back end by balancing the generation with the customer load. So that's just how it worked for a century almost.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the paradigm's been changing dramatically and quickly, and it doesn't work like that anymore.
Okay, that makes sense. So another thing that you're pretty well known on Twitter for among Bitcoiners is your advocacy of nuclear power as a way to mine Bitcoin, which I think is amazing. It just sounds like so futuristic. So do you kind of want to like tell us about why you think this and what you have in mind when it comes to nuclear power plants and Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, well, I think it is funny to hear you say it reminds you of the future, because really it's our past, right? The
Yeah.
utility I worked for had the largest nuclear fleet in the country. They built out gigawatts of nuclear in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it is still to this day just humming along 99.9% of every hour of every year. And they just had their licenses renewed for several more decades, and then after that they're probably going to get renewed again, right? So it is certainly our future, but let's not forget about the fact that we have already done it before. We did it really well, and it has done nothing but perform exactly as designed. It really is just like, it's just immaculate. And then you look back on that and you say, why did we stop? Why why did we not keep doing that? And there's some reasons. I think primarily it was overregulation, and basically, people decided they were scared of or scared of nuclear, and it just became impossible to build anything like that anymore. I'm hopeful that that's changing. I think it needs to change, absolutely. I think that the fact that nuclear is such a dense energy generator that you build one of these things and you can predict the power that's going to be generating from day one to year 70, right? Like, that's it, just boom, done. And we just very easy to engineer around from a grid perspective. Like, it's almost too simple, right? And sometimes I'm like, is it really that simple? Yeah, I think it is. You build nuclear and you just build it as as much as you can, right? And of course we need, I just think if we had spent the last 20 years, people like me, people like all the other smartest engineers, and everybody in the utilities that have all been spending their time, energy, attention, emotion, passion on trying to figure out how to make solar work, when it's just so obvious from the get-go that there's no end game, there's no provable end game. You can't tell me that there's a future where this just works, right? Like, it's obvious. Instead of doing that for the last 20 years, if we had just had everything focused on nuclear and didn't take no for an answer, we'd be in such a different place. I think the good news is we have the opportunity to get there and get there quickly. It's just going to take people to recognize that solar and wind are leading us into a dead end, and it couldn't be more obvious. And yet there's this opportunity with nuclear. And the problem with nuclear, like I mentioned before, is it's not flexible, right? It just hums along. And so historically, that was a concern, because if customer load dropped below what your nuclear generator was building or producing, what are you going to do?
Yeah, you can't like dial it back.
Yeah, you can't really dial it back. So they did all sorts of stuff, and then they called it baseload, right? Like you size it so that you're almost certain that customer load, no matter what, will never drop below that level. So that's kind of definition of baseload. Well, now that concept, I'm pretty sure I'm talking to some people. I think the concept of baseload is just gone because um, you don't need to worry about customer load dropping below whatever your
Like
nuclear
mining could
generation.
just take
Boom,
all the,
exactly.
yeah.
So instead of building from base load up with flexible resources to respond and balance to variable customer demand, and so that's the old paradigm, and that's just how it had to be because you couldn't there wasn't Bitcoin mining. Okay, well now we have Bitcoin mining. So instead of that, you just set a high bar. Boom, you just build as much generation as you can, and customer load does this underneath. And instead of going from base load up, you're just coming down with Bitcoin mining to meet the other customer load on the system wherever it is. And as it increases, Bitcoin mining Bitcoin mining decreases, vice versa. And I think in general that concept again, it's so straightforward. This is freshman year of college, systems electrical engineering, if that, and it's probably just a general engineering course. I mean, senior in high school could could design this circuit in general, right? I mean, it's so straightforward. Certainly compared to whatever the future may end up having to be, or what people imagine it might need to be when it comes to solar and wind and batteries and thermostats and car charge. I mean, it couldn't be more distinct to me. And like I said, yeah, we built nuclear before. Other countries are building nuclear. China's selling us their cheap solar panels so we can destroy our grids. Meanwhile, they're building out nuclear, and they're building out nuclear in other countries too, right? Like it's imperative that we really start to focus seriously on nuclear power. We don't take no for an answer. And if it were up to me, we would stop tomorrow with wind and solar, like basta, right? Like enough. That's it. If there was ever the right amount of solar and wind to have on a system from an engineering perspective, I'm sure we've already passed that threshold, right? Like we got enough. All right. Everybody that's been fixated on trying to solve all those problems and maintain reliability to the best of your ability, but now focus on nuclear. Done.
I have a quick question. So like nuclear, I guess, kind of got a bad rap because of Chernobyl, and then more recently the Fukushima thing that happened like 10 or 15 years ago. Like, I guess, what
No
would you
one
say to
died.
critics?
Yeah.
Like,
All right. Well, that's number one. I mean, first of all, Chernobyl, and I would never claim to be like a nuclear expert, right? I'm familiar. I'm very familiar with it as a generation resource on the system from like, larger perspective. And then, I just understand, all right, cool. We built those plants in the 60s. They're still working and they're going to work for another 30 years. Like, okay, that's easy to understand. But with Chernobyl, it's my understanding that was more of like a Soviet USSR problem that it wasn't, they didn't have bread in the shelves, and, go figure, they couldn't safely operate a nuclear reactor. But even given that, like it was bad, but the amount of people, like it wasn't, more people died in the tsunami, right? In like Indonesia, like magnitudes more people probably died getting electrocuted by installing solar than how many people like died in Fukushima, right? And I think those are catastrophic events. Fukushima, again, there were clear engineering oversights when it came to where they put the backup diesel generators to power their cooling water. They were they weren't high enough above ground, right? And they got flooded, and the cooling for the waste rods with circulating water stopped. and then it started to overheat. But still, think about it. Like only one of the four reactors actually had an issue. I think only a couple people died. More people died evacuating from Fukushima than actually like died because of the incident. Um, it's as far as I know, it's operating right now. And certainly like the three of the four reactors, I'm pretty sure are still operating. Japan's like full, like they're all about nuclear again, and then there was 3 Mile Island, right? And that was a scare. I'm not an expert on exactly what happened, but at the end of the day, like it wasn't catastrophic. It is just one. We have many nuclear power plants in the United States and around the world that have just been humming along for decades, and um, you have to start comparing also like the opportunity costs. Like the risk seems actually, when you really think about it in general, like in totality, the risk is very low. It's so incredibly reliable. It's so incredibly dense. Essentially, I think it's very fair to consider it renewable. The amount of energy you get out of a little pellet, you like power a home for a month or something. I mean, it's
Incredible.
insane. It's incredible, and yet we've just been ignoring it, and that I think we just can't. We're gonna have to get back to it.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate your perspective again. I'm pretty ignorant in general when it comes to like nuclear power and that kind of thing. I just know like the media has been fear mongering about it like most of my adult life.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely some actual fear and misunderstanding, but I think it's not unfair to say that there certainly have been targeted campaigns against nuclear. Perhaps by solar and wind, perhaps by no. I mean, I'm not joking. Nothing's neutral in the
Mhm.
world, and when you feel like you're receiving a message from media and from advertisements or this or that, like there's always someone getting paid big bucks behind the other side of that
Yeah, there's like a
screen.
lobbying industry behind each one of
Yeah,
those different
exactly,
industries.
right? Because if we had been installing nuclear since, if we never stopped, there would have never been any need. Nobody would have wasted a second thought about solar and wind because it's carbon free, right? Like that's the last thing, and it's carbon free, right? So you're concerned about carbon emissions. You're concerned about climate. Boom, nuclear. Boom, done. That's it. No, instead they want to mow down 5 acres per megawatt. That's not even an actual megawatt of solar. You want to do a 1 gigawatt solar facility? That's 5,000 acres of land to put solar panels on for 1 gigawatt. It's not even an actual gigawatt. It's at 20% capacity factor. You don't know when it's actually going to be producing power or not. Like, it's just insane. It really is.
I want to change the subject a little bit. When I first spoke to you earlier this week, you were telling me that you had just been in El Salvador. And as
Yeah.
we all know, El Salvador is a famous Bitcoin nation now that they passed the Bitcoin legal tender law. And there's interest in starting mining operations there. And mining is very near and dear to your heart. So would you mind giving us, I guess, your insider's perspective on mining and the possibility of mining in El Salvador?
Yeah, well, I think you kind of just need to take a step back and just what are the possibilities for El Salvador, right? And we all hear the stories in the U.S., right? I've been paying attention to El Salvador since Bukele did announce the Bitcoin law at Bitcoin Miami 2021, almost 3 years ago, and I was like, oh, there's there's my spot. And anyway, I was finally able to make it down there and for the having party, and everything that you hear, to me, it exceeded my expectations, and I already had really high expectations because I've been paying attention. I've been nothing but impressed with what Bukele has been able to accomplish his leadership. I watch him give speeches or interviews on podcasts, and it's just like, holy cow, man. El Salvador is so lucky to have a president like him. I mean, just the simple fact that he's not 87, right? I mean, but just the leadership and the charisma and the focus on on transforming El Salvador, right? And I was there, I saw it, it's real. I met plenty of people that have been there 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, and El Salvadorans that have been there their whole life. And they'll tell you, like, yeah, it was different 12 months ago, and it was even more different 18 months ago. I've never felt like I'm more concerned about walking to the murder mart in Charlotte, like down the street, than I felt walking around the capital city of San Salvador, or the beach towns in and around El Zonte. So what are the possibilities for El Salvador? Well, I think they're unlimited, and this, yeah, and it's going to happen fast. With respect to energy, I think it is also unlimited, and I think El Salvador, I'm not an expert on their system. I'm looking at it from an outsider's perspective, and I have some understanding of how it exists today as an electric grid, but I'm certainly not, I would never say I know I'm an expert on it by any means. But just from the outside looking in, they have such an incredible opportunity with geothermal specifically, but also nuclear. They haven't, as far as I know, gone down the path of getting bogged down by wind and solar yet. And I think that if I had my way, they won't be, right? I consider it a shitcoin, right? Like, no shitcoins in El Salvador, and that includes solar. See ya, bye. Sorry, we don't need you. We like our jungle. We don't want to mow down acres and acres of jungle just to put up solar panels. It doesn't make any sense. Let's do geothermal. Let's do nuclear. They truly, like, with everything else outside of energy that's going on, they clearly are going to need reliable energy, and they're going to need as much of it as quickly as they can. I truly believe that they will be the Singapore of the West, or at some point it won't even make sense to compare them to Singapore, but they're going to need reliable, dense, and if you want carbon free, throw it in there, carbon free energy generation. And as far as I can tell, they have that opportunity in spades with geothermal and with nuclear, and it's just a matter of making it happen, right, and being strategic about it. Getting the projects going and doing it right. And again, it's another example of they've done it before, right? They have existing geothermal plants. They're as far as I know, they're like 10 or 20 years old or something. Like, they've done it before. So there's absolutely no reason, and it's only gotten better. Geothermal has only gotten better, and there is new advancements that are making it. They're like, they're, again, not an expert on geothermal yet, but they, as far as I know, there's like a version of fracking that they're developing to dig the wells for the loops for geothermal. And this is new. This is a new development. And just as I understand it, just like kind of fracking revolutionized the natural gas industry by providing, access to like all this abundant natural gas that they didn't have access to before. And it's just there, and it's so cheap. There's a similar opportunity being developed with geothermal, where now they can do some version of this, and where before it might have been really complicated or even cost prohibitive to dig these holes into volcanoes. I love saying that. It might not be anymore, but even if it was, like, that's what they need to focus on. That's what they need to do. They need to focus on building dense, reliable energy. And I see nothing but opportunity with geothermal and nuclear, and they can become the energy hub of Central America and beyond, right? They can build transmission lines straight down through Colombia, and who knows how far they want to go. They can go up into Mexico, right? They can start to connect the entire region and just be delivering power if they want to, or they can mine Bitcoin, right? Like it'll be their choice. If Mexico doesn't want to pay more than 3 cents for it, then whatever, we'll mine Bitcoin, right? Like it's going to be that type of opportunity for them, I think. But I to be careful, because I can. I'm living proof of being bogged down and distracted and exhausted by wind and solar, and I would hate to see them, accidentally or just unwittingly start to go down that path, because kind of getting back to what you said earlier, like everyone just tells them how amazing solar and wind is. Like what I want to do the first, the minute I get down there, is start talking with people and start making sure they clearly understand my concerns and my issues with everything that's going on with wind and solar in the US, and like it's not worth it. Like even if you're not installing geothermal and nuclear tomorrow, it's still a better scenario for you to not be installing solar and wind. And just when you are able to then implement geothermal and nuclear, that's when it's going to happen. But you don't need the solar and wind. It's just a total distraction. And I'm so excited for the opportunity I see there to help them make it happen as in any way I can. There's very smart people down there. And I've talked to some of them, and they shared, their general plans and what's going on. And so I couldn't be more excited to get to have the opportunity to work with people like the ones I met with, and yeah, hopefully I'm down there in less than 2 months. So wish me luck.
Amazing. Thank you for your insight about El Salvador and the potential mining situation there. That's super exciting.
They're not going to be able to mine if they go down the path of solar and wind. That's not. Yeah, but if they build out geothermal and nuclear, it could be a mining mecca.
Justin, we're nearing the end of the podcast here. Do you want to let people know how they can keep tabs on your work, how they can follow you on social media, how they can keep tabs on Standard Power and what you guys are working on in Ohio and all that?
Yeah. Well, I think my main interaction with the community, Bitcoin and otherwise, is through Twitter. I'm at JORKNEY5. And I am starting to feel motivated to put out more content, to dig deep and start trying to share and explain as best as I can my very unique perspective on everything that's going on right now in the US grids, at least specifically with wind and solar, but just in general. And so if you really like solar and you love it, and you're curious why I'm such a bad person and I hate it, I would encourage you to check it out. If you already know that solar is not the right answer, then you may get bored. I try to post about Bitcoin stuff too every now and then, but I am really focused on trying to share the message that we kind of just went over today on Twitter. And yeah, I share stuff about Standard Power too every now and then. I have another project with a really large utility that I'm consulting for on Bitcoin mining. That's very exciting. So that'll clearly be coming out, and I'll share the news when I can on that. And otherwise, that's it. I try to stay humble, stack sats, and stay solvent, right? And shut down solar. That is the criticism I get, that sometimes I come off as aggressive or maybe a little too toxic. And for anybody that may it may feel that way after seeing my Twitter posts. I apologize for that. It's not my intention to hurt anyone's feelings or to attack anybody, but I take reliable, affordable electricity very seriously as a foundation of our human civilization, and I literally could not be more concerned with where things are headed in the U.S. in terms of our fixation on solar and wind and now batteries. And I think it's pretty obvious it's not headed anywhere good, and it's not going to get any better as long as we keep doing what we've been doing. So that's where the toxicity and maybe the aggressiveness comes from. It's only because I care, right?
Thanks again, man. And then I can't say that you're wrong, because Europe is having energy crises for the same reasons, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, let's install more wind, more solar. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. We cut down forests in North Carolina, like maybe even old growth forests. It's really bad. We turn these forests into wood pellets. Then we put the wood pellets on a ship, and then we ship it across the Atlantic Ocean. And then they put the wood pellets in the power plant that used to burn coal, but now it burns biofuels. And so they get to meet their, ESG targets. It's just everywhere you look is total insanity. That's just one. Yeah, Europe, like Germany is shutting down all their nuclear. The Nord Stream pipeline was just blown up. Like their electricity's just off the charts in terms of cost. Their industrial sector is shutting down. And yet they have the most solar and wind, right? Like they were supposed to be the paragon of the renewable energy transition, and they're like building new coal power plants now, and their electricity is 3 times as expensive as it was 10 years ago, and more unreliable. I mean, it's just, yeah. Anyway, yeah. Sorry, you got me started again. Yeah, it's not good. It's not good.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show. It was a pleasure interviewing you. Whenever you want to come back on the show, let me know. Maybe when you want to announce your new project that you're working on, and you're more than welcome to.
Yeah. Well, and just one last thing I forgot to mention. I am actually working on an article that I hope to publish that kind of, again, me trying to share my experience and what I consider knowledge and understanding of what's going on, why it's happening, and what our options are at the moment, and what the likely consequences of us continuing to do the same thing indefinitely are going to be. And so I'm hoping that article comes out fairly soon, and I'll certainly let you know, and I'll post it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks. Let us know, and I'm sure we'll repost it for you.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it was great talking with you. Really enjoyed the conversation.